like, level 4, self-driving.
Okay, let's recap really quickly, because we've mentioned spirit cooking, and a lot of the listeners in the audience probably don't know exactly what that is. Can you just simply explain it as simple as possible? I know it's not simple, but...
Well, okay, so this is what spirit cooking is. Whenever you, in the most simplest way possible, whenever we look back at older stories of witches standing over a cauldron and they're putting ingredients into the cauldron, those ingredients, because of what parts of the body, the animal that it came from, and even the chemical and biological makeup of those things, they have an effect being used through a simple rudimentary animal on the very reality and even the resonance of that reality, and when you put those things into food or into that pot, and you're doing incantations and you're creating this sort of altar effect, because the heating of water in a cast iron pot, right? That's a very interesting process. But I mean, the point is the effect of doing that and casting spells does generate some effect, but the actual caster has to be somebody with a particular orientation of either directly towards an awareness and an energy and a mental capacity towards positive things or negative things. However, when it comes to the average person, though, the same process of adding strange animal parts or ingredients into boiling water while going through an incantation or even being put under a trance, i.e. drinking something, is no different than your stomach functioning as the same cauldron with the peculiar animal ingredients or other parts put in it. So all of these peculiar food elements or food ingredients so it's basically a merger of dark magic through science. And we've heard this a lot, but essentially what's going on is that they deliberately altered the content in regards to the ingredients of your food so that they can get you emotionally agitated by something. And they know they have to engineer it over a certain period of time. And once they get you into that state of agitation and an emotional upheaval, they can pretty much make any sort of suggestive commentary towards you and to you about a particular ideal or thought, and they can manipulate you emotionally into that. So they can get you angry about something you love, and they can make you love something you've always hated. And once you get someone to that state, their neurochemical feedback and the proper hormones for managing higher brain functions to reason these things don't work, because your body's being flooded chemically by things like, stress toxins and stress hormones that are coming from you being angry. And once they start telling you this stuff, I mean, there's a very, very clear present ritual behind a lot of this stuff, and they play it out over, certain periods of the year. But in regards to spirit cooking, that's basically what it is because once you're going through that chemical, process of being agitated and you're thinking weird thoughts and they're telling you good is bad and bad is good, and they're finding ways to either make you like something that you hate or hate something you love, once they get you in that loop, and then once you become in a social environment where everyone else is mentally thinking the same thing, and there's a component of ostracization if you're not going along with it, that's when the mental entrainment kicks in. And I'll be honest, a part of your, a very big part of that technology directly relates to a lot of the media that you will sit there and watch and not realize that they will tell somebody who's a writer for a reality show or a kid's show or drama or something, here, put this in there. Hey, here, put that in there. And you don't realize that they're conditioning you little by little. And there's another thing called the apatishas where, they realize that, if you put certain things in front of people and, either emit certain things or divulge certain things to them, that emotional, stain is in their temple now. So it's this weird thing of, to them shining a light through the window.
So let's talk about this phenomena of, okay, we house certain organisms in our gut flora, but we also house parasites, right?
I'm sorry. I want to say something really quickly. So for those of you that feel a little odd that she keeps cutting me off, trust me, if she doesn't do it, we won't get there. We won't get there. She has to.
I'm trying to speed it up. I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying it now. I'm saying it now so that way people won't, they won't look back at this and go, man, she just.
I'm just trying to move it along a little bit. So yeah, I wanted to just so we've covered the gut flora and the spirit cooking a little bit, and I just want to talk about the organisms and the parasites and the hive-mindedness of the parasites, and like the insect world, they are also telepathic. So just touch on that briefly.
Well, I mean, simply put, all your microorganisms, to some extent, are hive-minded, and their hive-minded behavior is a direct correlation to how many of them have created a colony within your body. So individually, you'll get a group of them like, oh, okay, so they're swimming around in your tissue or certain fluids in your body. They're leaving chemical trails like they're almost leaving like breadcrumbs or little, messages like, hey, so I've been here. Is anyone else here? Because, what most people don't know is microorganisms have the ability, and specifically single-celled ones, to produce a 1.2 or 1.3 or 1.5 hertz signal, kilohertz signal. I don't know how far it goes. I haven't had time to look into what the range on it is. But at the point where they're doing that, that's something you would do in terms of efficiency as a microorganism, because you can't keep leaving chemical messages, because the environment that you're trying to, parasitically leach food and sustenance from, you can't give your position away, so to speak, and it might not be a good environment to eat in, so you're communicating. But entrainment for rudimentary intellect, organisms, as far as microorganisms go, is kind of almost near instantaneous. And some people might say, well, how do you figure it's near instantaneous? It's like, well, look at any yellow fungus growth process. I mean, when you get a few of them, they immediately start growing. They immediately start eating everything in the environment. They immediately start forming very complex colonies. They go from simple things to very complex colonies as they grow, like as they spread in a petri dish, as they spread behind a wall, as they spread like any number of places. If you give them scaffolding, they will immediately erect something complex that will allow them in their biomass to start feeding, like at a point where they're not even eating this stuff anymore. All they're doing is replicating and shoving this food or nutrients down these tubules directly into like the central corridor, down those corridors for their for them to basically start doing that. They form a small colony, meaning that they start to function without chemical messages, and they become a hive-minded organism. They become a single organism, essentially, with multiple parts. But the question that no one has been able to answer about that is, well, if there's no brain and they're hive-minded, how are they coordinating the movement without using chemical messages? Other than the fact that they're all, telepathically, in the sense that they're using a form of radio transmission to communicate with each other. But then that still raises the question: how do they coordinate at that complex level without a central, organism to draw from? But the point I'm getting at is that microorganisms do that once they start forming colonies. Now, some of them are not as complex, but definitely more pathogenic. I shouldn't say more pathogenic. I would say more virulent and dangerous organisms, microorganisms, as they start to replicate in a host. They are, as I understand it, they definitely use a form of radio communication. I know this is weird. People haven't heard this in a while, but I have to tell you this. A wave guide, anywhere from a wave guide to producing radio signals at a microscopic level, is not a complex thing. It is so not a complex thing, because we've been thinking about microorganisms as wet, little tiny things, when in reality they're well constructed cluster of complex molecular structures, and you don't need a very complex molecular structure, even at a single cellular organism size, to produce microwaves, or even for that matter, actually I wouldn't say microwaves, but even radio waves. So, but getting back to that, but here's the difference with the coronavirus, which is really interesting, which is it's starting to exhibit behavior that almost denotes that as it spreads either X number of degrees to your Z axis, meaning east to west, or your X axis, meaning north and south, it's almost as if it becomes a little aware that it's no longer in the place it was, and it's making really quick adjustments biologically at almost, let me put it this way. If two people have walkie-talkies, and they're both starting out somewhere cold, like China, and one of them starts to move really quickly, because remember, viruses don't move at the speed of travel as in a jet. So we're mutating it faster than it would naturally mutate by getting in an airplane and flying all the way here in just a short amount of time. We're causing all the molecular triggers in this thing to make it rapidly mutate so it can adjust to the host that it's in. And once it gets to a new host, it's like, oh, okay, cool, new host. Let me adjust so it's adjusting structurally for the environment, while simultaneously the environmental triggers and pressures, while it's then adjusting biologically to a new host. Because you got to remember, some of these places it's going at that speed is, it shows up, it's coming out of an Asian male host. It's adjusting to a climate that's a little bit warmer. Now it's getting, hosts that are maybe a little bit more, European, or maybe a little more. But let me say this one thing though, which is, but the question becomes, when you look at the nature of how it mutates, when it's in hosts that are like either on the same latitude or within the same, I'd say, 1 degree to 10 degree latitude.
You started mentioning about some of the behaviors. You started mentioning about some of the behaviors that the COVID-19 is showing, and I know when you had mentioned when you were in China that people were acting oddly. Like you said that when the effects of the virus initially began, people were. You mentioned that people were social, like wanting to be social and meowing and doing strange behaviors. And it is funny because I posted an article to Social Media News Network this morning where in Italy, people are singing out of their windows. They're quarantined and they're singing out of their windows. And it just, you even mentioned that they sounded like feral cats.
Well, what I'm saying is that I have a weird suspicion. Okay, so here's the worst thing about the virus, that if this one thing never happened, we might have only seen it kill off specifically Chinese people, right? Or specifically Asian people, right? Mm-hmm. And because this one thing happened that almost everybody missed completely, and if you didn't know this, then you wouldn't have maybe thought about it, which is there was a particular antibiotic that they decided to start using in China maybe like a couple of years ago, and it was on the pigs. It was on meat. And pretty much everyone in China is eating, pig meat, right? Well, this antibiotic allowed for bacteria. They have been using it so much. They were giving so much of this stuff to the animals that this antibiotic basically created it basically biologically terraformed every single bacteria that came in contact with it in China in such a way where now bacteria, like without even trying, automatically by being in a host who was Chinese, who was eating this pig meat,